Welcome back, everyone. Today I am joined by Ian Harrison. Ian is the director of Growhouse. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
For those in the audience who might not have heard of Growhouse, can you tell me a little bit about what it is and what you do?
Yeah, we are a consultancy that works with senior leaders, with performance coaching, leadership development, and on improving employee experience.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there for sure. Should we start right at the beginning? Let's go right back to the beginning of your career. Was coaching something you always wanted to do, or no? How did you start?
No, I probably learned to coach without realizing it, which a lot of people do. But I didn't really discover coaching until I was in my 30s, probably late 30s even. So I started out as a minister in independent Baptist churches. I served 3 independent Baptist churches, sort of around the Midlands, for nearly 20 years. And then it was part of my career change was discovering coaching and deciding that was the way I wanted to go. So no, coaching was something I discovered midlife. I'm not going to say later in life, but midlife.
Okay, great. So you said you were a minister. Now, I imagine there are quite a lot of similarities between being a minister and being a coach. You've got a community to serve and you're there to support people. So tell me a little bit about how being a minister has informed your coaching practice.
So there was a really interesting moment for me. So leaving a career like the ministry is interesting because you go into it thinking it's a lifelong calling, and my sense of identity got tangled up in the job. And then I had a moment talking to a friend sometime after I'd left the church, in which they said, look, Ian, you need to realize you're not who you are because you are a minister. You are a minister because of who you are. And that's a sort of long-winded answer to get to the thought that, yes, coaching felt like a continuation of supporting people to grow, of building relationships with people in which I could, enable them to be more of what they wanted to be. So in that sense, in some ways, there's lots of differences as well, but in some ways it was bringing that sort of pastoral thing from a religious community into the world of business. So, and I think that's still probably where I'm at. I'm fascinated by people and really just enjoy those nurturing relationships.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So I want to go back to one thing you just said at the start then, was that you felt like you were becoming entangled in with your career. Now, you coach a lot of senior leaders and people in positions that I imagine hold a lot of responsibility. Do you find a lot of the leaders you talk to do find them getting their personal lives entangled in with their careers? And is that something you see quite a lot?
I don't see it overtly, but you can hear it sometimes in the way people talk about themselves, and it tends to catch people by surprise actually when they do face a career change or retirement. So it's a problem that can sit there underneath, undetected, and then jump up and bite you at moments of change. It's that moment when you find you can no longer continue, for whatever reason, doing the job your identity's got tangled up into, and suddenly you realize, but I don't know who I am outside that job. And I don't know how to be me if I'm not doing those things. And suddenly you realize you've got yourself all tangled up. So I hear it. And certainly when I'm working with leaders to consider their identity as a leader, I want to approach it as, how do they show up as a leader? So with the thought in the background, and sometimes even in the foreground, that the way we as individuals turn up is different in different contexts. So it's not about defining myself by being a leader. It's about defining my leadership by who I am. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think, especially since the pandemic, there's been so much written and talked about, sort of bringing purpose into what you're doing. And I think the way the world is at the minute and the way everything is changing, like purpose and values are imperative for any business to be successful at the minute, because I don't know, they just direct everything, don't they? So how do you help leaders to uncover their values and purpose?
So in a coaching context, it's really just, it's getting them to reflect on past experience where they found most satisfaction, most fulfillment. It's about getting them to reflect on what's really important to them. So one of the things that happens a lot with coaching is somebody will turn up and say, my goal is, I'll just use the easy one, my goal is finance. I'm very financially driven. And that's a really easy statement for people to make. But often it's quite a shallow statement, because very few people are driven by simply having money in the bank. If they're they think about that, that's what they're driven by, but they're not. What they're driven by is what that money in the bank enables them to do. And the problem is, if they, like you say, if you don't move to that deeper space, you can get lost, because you think it's all about money. And so you make decisions that are all about money. And actually there comes a point where those decisions start undermining the very things the money originally gave you. So it's about getting people to reflect on themselves. Sometimes to reflect on where they felt uncomfortable is equally useful. So what are the times where you've been asked to do something that you felt distinctly uncomfortable with, and then get them to examine that, what's going on there? What was it that made you feel uncomfortable? And you can sort of dig down and usually find a value or a belief that was being compromised. And that then you can bring that to the surface. And once you've surfaced them all, you can then actually deliberately include them into the considerations going forward.
Yeah, so it sounds like you have to have quite a lot of not necessarily difficult conversations with people, but you're asking them to be quite vulnerable and think about things differently. So what sort of approach do you have to help people to open up, and how do you get them to sort of uncover all these things?
So opening up is all about building a trusting relationship and a sense of safety. So in the first place, when a coaching relationship is new, that's all about the way you set the understanding of the contract up. So just building into an understanding of what's going on, a clarity about confidentiality, about what won't be said outside of the conversation, so that you create a safe space for your client to speak openly. And then it's about patiently working in. So you'll have some people who are more at ease talking about themselves, and they will jump straight in at the deep end and want to talk about themselves. What happens at least as often, if not more often, is that you start and the first few coaching sessions are very much about practical things, problems they're trying to work out, strategies they're trying to build. And as you sort of work through those and build the relationship, you get to a place, you can get to a place where then it becomes appropriate to be able to ask the deeper questions. There are other ways in, like simply a tool I use regularly with leaders is to ask them to go away between sessions and think of one or two leaders they've hugely admired, and then think about what it was about those people that they admired, and then that becomes the starting point for the next conversation. And once you're talking about, well, I admired this in this person, you've opened a door to be able to talk about those deeper things about like values and beliefs, and but it takes time.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it reminds me as well what you just said of that quote, you can't be what you can't see. And I think when you bring examples of other people that you do admire, it does open up those conversations for sure. So is everybody coachable?
No. So I think being coachable is very much about your mindset. So Carol Dweck talks about fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And there are some people who either think they know everything, so they're resistant to the idea of coaching or spending time reflecting on what they're going to do or their own growth in their role. And there are other people who, this is less so with senior leaders, this tends to be when you're a little bit further down the ladder, who for whatever reason have become disengaged with their workplace and to a point where they're not interested in thinking about stuff. They just want to be told what's expected of them. They'll go away and do exactly what's expected of them, no more, no less. They'll take their pay and they'll go home. And if people are stuck in that space, it can be really hard to get them out of it. It's a bit like, I remember hearing a senior consultant psychiatrist years ago say that the disturbing thing about even his profession, which obviously has depths to which I don't go as a coach, was that he said that statistics suggested that 1/3 of people would get better without a psychiatrist. 1/3 would get better whilst waiting to see a psychiatrist. And 1/3 won't get better whether or not they see a psychiatrist. He said, so if you think about that, he said, that means that my job is about supporting people who are never going to change to get better in their context, or sometimes supporting people as they go through a process of becoming well again. But actually, I can't make them well.
Yeah, that's quite a thing to hear, isn't it? When you put it like that, it's quite shocking to sort of hear the acceptance of that, but it makes total sense. So, yeah. If somebody is ready to be coached and they would like to find a coach, what kind of characteristics should they be looking for in a coach? How do you choose?
First of all, they need to be really clear what they mean by coaching, because it's a word that gets used for all sorts of things. So if they want somebody who can give them advice, who's been where they've been, done what they're planning to do, and on top of that, support them to think through their own career or business issues, then what they're really looking for is a mentor. So obviously what they need to do is go and find somebody who has the ability and willingness to sit down with them and to listen to them and to question them and to help them to think for themselves, but at the same time has the ability to guide them. In a similar way, if somebody thinks they want a business coach, and what they mean is they want a consultant who will come in and help them do all the things that are necessary to be successful, then they need to look for somebody with that kind of experience who's got a good track record. If, however, they want what I would call a coach, so somebody whose job is to enable the thinking of their clients. So if you want to coach somebody who will help you think for yourself, who will make you examine your own plans, your own thoughts, and hold you accountable to, and enable you to build plans and then hold you accountable to following through on them, then you're looking for somebody who probably describes themselves as a performance coach or something similar. And then it's about, do you get on with them? Can you imagine sitting down talking to this person? Because one of the things you have to accept as a coach is there are lots of coachable people out there that I can't coach because we just wouldn't fit. So find somebody you feel you could sit and talk to. And then, yeah, just have a go. You know, maybe don't jump in straight away and commit to 2 years with somebody. Do 2 or 3 sessions with them, see how you get on. So, and then it's about being clear. So coaching can do all sorts of different things. I can think of a client who started with me just before all the lockdowns came, and the initial brief was to help them develop their leadership of their business. So they were founder and owner of a business, but then the COVID came and the first lockdowns, and they just found that they were completely emotionally overwhelmed and they couldn't go to the places they'd originally planned the coaching to go. They were struggling to just keep going. So we moved the coaching from being a 2-hour session once a month to being half an hour every Monday morning. And it was really action focused. How are you? How are things going? Where are you at with work? What needs to happen this week? Who needs? And it was really about helping them just plan out their week, set themselves some goals with the knowledge that next Monday they're going to have to talk to me again, and I'm going to ask them, how have you got on? And then as COVID sort of wound down again, we sort of moved back towards the leadership intentions we'd originally had. So it's then, if you're looking for a coach, being clear, what is it you want? Do you want to develop as a person, or is it about driving you forward with planning and strategy and those sorts of things?
Yeah, there's more to be said about accountability, isn't there? But I'm not sure what the question is.
So accountability is massive for leaders, and as a coach, one of the things you hear, one of the standard pieces of feedback you hear when you ask a client what's the value they're getting out of it is, I get stuff done because I know I'm meeting you. And one of the reasons, particularly people right at the top seek out coaches, is they often don't have somebody like to hold them accountable, or even to think out loud with. So one client I'm currently working with came to me and said they were being expected to be quite innovative about the future of the business. The board were behind them to be innovative, but the board weren't engaging with them in the innovation process. So, and that had led to a fear that if they turned up with an unformed, not fully formed idea in the boardroom, that would undermine their credibility with the board. So they engage with me as somebody they could have totally confidential conversations with, bounce ideas around with, somebody who would interrogate their ideas, so that by the time they got in front of a board with an idea, it was clearer and more fully formed. So it's really interesting, that sort of, it's the old caveat thing, it's lonely at the top. And part of what coaching does, I think, is it addresses that, both in terms of a confidential sounding board and holding people accountable where nobody else is going to hold them accountable.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's so important, isn't it? And you'd forget sometimes that you are on your own, and you do need to have a community and have people to share ideas with, for sure. Okay, so I've seen quite a lot of articles recently, and I think it's quite a big topic at the minute, that sort of loads and loads of managers are having to focus on the mental well-being of their team, but there's no one focusing on their mental well-being.
Yeah.
So how important do you think it is for managers to get that kind of support?
Massively.
Yeah.
If you go into most coaches will have somebody, either an official supervisor or somebody they can unload with. If you're a psychiatrist or a psychologist, as far as I understand it, you have to have a supervisor, because if you make yourself, the minute you make yourself top of a pyramid, which is dealing with wellness, everything stops with you, and it just, nobody can survive that. And so managers really need to build a support network, whether that's through having a coach or whether it's supporting each other across that level of management, or however they need to build a support network, have people that are looking out for them and their well-being.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, let's move on to your books then. So you've written a book called Gratitude Mapping. What is gratitude mapping?
So I haven't written a book called Gratitude Mapping.
Oh, no. I thought that was yours. Never mind.
No, so Gratitude Mapping is mine, but it's not a book yet.
Oh, okay. What was the book?
The book is The Enabling Leader, or The Enabling Manager.
All right, which one do you want to talk about first?
Well, let's talk about The Enabling Manager first, because that one exists as a book.
All right. Sorry. Okay, you've written a book called The Enabling Manager. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so The Enabling Manager I co-wrote with a colleague called Miles Downey, who was responsible for one of the best-selling books around coaching skills. And essentially, the book tries to address the problem of how do you integrate coaching skills into a management role. So historically, there's been lots of training run that has implied, if not said directly, that managers need to be coaches. And the problem with that is managers know that they have responsibilities that go beyond the boundaries of coaching. If you're a manager in a business where you're being set goals and there are expectations on you, to simply give your team freedom to work out what they want to do with no boundaries, no context, just feels very, I mean, the word fluffy is used, and in that scenario, I think it's probably justified. So, and yet coaching skills are really important to building strong teams. So the book has a 4-part model. The foundation of the model is to build good relationships. And then we talk about 3 overlapping conversations, if you like, that a manager needs to be having with their team. There's, and we call them lead, manage, coach. So lead is about setting context. Why are we doing this? Why is what we're doing important? How does it fit into the big picture? It's all the sort of Whereas how do we as a team make a difference to the business and to our clients and all those sorts of things. And then there's the managed conversation, which is all about what are we doing? What are the expectations? What are the processes? What are the timelines? All those sort of practical things that are important to get things done. And then once those are in place, there's a space to then turn to your team and say, okay, let's talk about how are we going to do this? How could you do this? And it engages the team then and the individuals in your team to bring their skills, their insight, and to really engage with achieving the team's goals. And so you end up with a really sort of healthy place where the team are focused, they know what's expected of them, they know the difference they can make if they deliver against their goals, but they also feel enabled and empowered to bring that skill, their own self, their own insights to the table in achieving that, which is obviously way more satisfying. It's also the answer to micromanagement, because obviously the micromanager is the almost opposite to that. The micromanager probably may not set out why this is important. They set out the what, and then they look over your shoulder and tell you how. Whereas our model is about giving people freedom in that how place within the confines and the context of the why and the what. So it's been greeted with some really good feedback. People are finding it useful. They're finding it a practical model. Had one client who even went as far, I think it was exaggerated, as this has completely changed my life. I suspect it's only changed the way she manages her team, but so that's the book, and it was published in June last year. Came out in the States in December. It was a delight to be involved in it as a project.
Yeah, it must be so rewarding hearing your clients come back with feedback like that. How important is it for you to bring sort of joy into your work? Like, you obviously get quite a lot of enjoyment out of writing and supporting people. How do you bring joy into what you do?
I think by enjoying myself. So I always have got a real kick out of spending time with people in whether that's in a group or one-on-one, in having interesting conversations. And so doing what I do just makes me smile. So I'm not sure I'm any more deliberate than that, really. I'm coaching is, I mean, you mentioned meaning and purpose earlier, and coaching really plays into my sense of purpose and delivers that sense of having a meaningful life and making a difference. So yeah, it is just a joyful activity most of the time.
Okay, and I imagine a lot of senior leaders, their roles are quite stressful, and it can be hard to find joy whilst they're working in the day-to-day of when you get bogged down with all the tasks you have to do. Yeah. How do you encourage leaders to bring more joy into what they do?
I think it is, again, about it's stepping back. So one of the things coaching does for people is it creates a discipline of, there's a space in your diary where you are going to step back and you're going to take a look at what yourself and what you're doing. And I think it's about giving people a chance to step back and reconnect with why they do what they do. Because like you say, we all do it in we can get bogged down in the minutiae of the tasks that form our job. I would be lying if I said there's any joy in completing a VAT return, but it has to be done. But when you get bogged down, it's about picking yourself up and taking that sort of helicopter view of saying, I'm not enjoying that task. Things are challenging at the moment. Things are stressful at the moment. But why do I do this? Occasionally, that leads to somebody going, I don't know why I do this anymore. And sometimes that loss of joy can be an indicator that it's time to think about moving on, because you've moved, you've changed, and this is no longer the space in which you're going to find that meaning and purpose. But yeah, it's about that helicopter view of reconnecting with the difference you make and why you do what you do.
Love it. Okay. What are the most common challenges you have your clients come to you with?
So I think we've mentioned all of them, actually. Okay. There's that need for a safe context to talk out loud with somebody and to think out loud with somebody. There's the discipline of taking a step back and taking that strategic view that we just mentioned. And the one perhaps we haven't mentioned is something that's becoming more and more prominent amongst people I talk to, and that's the balancing the needs of business against the desires of a team. So people's expectations have changed dramatically in the last few years in terms of their relationship to work. And for some people, that has turned into a desire, a dream of a vision of what work can be in terms of flexibility and time spent away from the office and all those sorts of things. And what I'm hearing at senior levels is people who desperately want their people to be happy and to enable the lives their people want to have, but also have to look at the needs of the business and are looking at the practicalities of all these people whose needs, if you were to give them everything they wanted and give them this vision of the life that they've created, you couldn't run your business. And that seems to be something more and more leaders are now really struggling with and needing to think about.
So presenteeism and the needs of the business versus the needs of the people.
Yeah, I think I was saying that then that I think part of this is a problem that's caused by the fact that a lot of managers measured presenteeism when everyone was expected to be in the office. So they're not used to measuring productivity or performance. And then productivity and performance, measuring productivity and performance when people aren't in the office is challenging. One scenario I've talked through with at least one person is this idea that, let's say you have a team, your business is moving towards being at capacity, and you're beginning to wonder about whether you need to take on an extra person. And then let's say 5 of your team are hitting all their targets, but they're working from home and they're hitting those targets in 4 days, which means you've got a whole extra person's worth of work potentially in the business. But they're saying they're working at capacity and hitting all their targets. So if you're just productivity based, how do you have that conversation that says, well, I know you're hitting all the targets we currently have, and it's lovely that you've got a 3-day weekend, but actually we're going to take on a new client now and none of you are going to get your 3-day weekend anymore. And how do you even know whether that's the case? So there are all sorts of challenges from a business side of this that collide with the idea that I'm performing, I'm doing everything I'm required to do. Does it really matter when I'm doing them, or how I'm doing them, or in what time I'm doing them? Because yes, it does, because if there's more capacity in the business, then there's room for more customers without more cost. And then equally, there's issues around training, and how do you learn from people? And I've had conversations with leaders about people who want to work at flexible times, but their role, it connects them with suppliers and customers who have their own timeframes. And so as a business, I need you to be available between this time and this time, because that's when the people you deal with are at work. And I'd love to make it more flexible than that, but
it's such a difficult one, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is a real difficult one. Okay, so let's flip that on its head completely. How much are you talking to senior leaders about work-life balance? Because like you said, that measure of productivity is something we've all been conditioned with. And sort of the workload versus the productivity and when works best for you seems to be a really big topic at the minute. So how do you help leaders to understand work-life balance and find it for themselves?
So that's about being willing to challenge them. So if I'm listening to them talk about the work they're doing and the stresses they're under, and I'm hearing a lack of work-life balance, it's calling it out. And then that almost always leads to a conversation, firstly about delegation, and then potentially onto whether they need more to employ more resource. Senior leaders are always going to work longer hours, I think, than the people they employ. But they do need to be effective leaders. They need that work-life balance. So it's about challenging it and then pushing that, then looking at where the problem is. Is it a problem with delegation, or is it a problem with resource in the company? And then getting them to think those things through.
Yeah, it's always hard, isn't it, when you have so much to do that you do think, oh, I'll just do it myself, and it piles up and it piles up and it piles up, and then you get to breaking point, and burnout seems to be such a huge nationwide problem at the minute with overworking and everything.
And I think it's the downside of working from home. There's a really interesting comment I heard made towards the end of one of the lockdowns on the radio, where a man had rung into a talk show and had told a story about how his son and wife, who were both in their 20s and were in their first home, so it was a small one or two bedroom house, and how when the first lockdown came and they were sent home, they were happy to sort of turn their lounge and dining room into offices and work from home, and it was part of doing their bit. But how, as time had gone on, their language had switched from working from home to living at work, because their work was in the lounge, their work was in the dining room. So, and we all have been there, we know what it's like if your laptop's there and your head's whirring away on what's happened during the day, and you remember that email you didn't send, so you pick up, and you don't make a note to do it in the morning, you pick up your laptop and you send the email. And that really quickly becomes working most evenings. Whereas one of the advantages of going into the office is there's a time you arrive and there's a time you leave. and that requires a lot of discipline from working from home, whether you're a senior leader or earlier in your career.
Yeah, it is. It's so difficult to switch off when everything is next to you, basically. Yeah, no, that's super interesting. So do you want to tell me a little bit about gratitude mapping?
Yeah, so gratitude mapping is a project that came out of a conversation with a client towards the end of the COVID lockdowns. They were bringing people back into the workplace. They had some teams, because of the nature of the work they do, they'd had some teams that had to be on the ground throughout COVID, other teams that have been at home all the time for nearly 18 months, others who'd been in and out as needed. And prior to everything going haywire with COVID, they had thought of themselves as having a cohesive business that felt like a family, and people got along well. They understood how each role was different and each role contributed to the whole, and there was respect, and people valued one another. This business they employ, it's about 150 people. And what they noticed is that people came back, they described competitive suffering. So the first thing that happened was everyone tried to convince everybody else that COVID had been harder for them than it had been for others who were in a different situation. And that had sort of rippled out into a tetchiness between teams, and instead of that sort of cohesive unit working together, they were competing and being tetchy with each other. And the HR lead from the client just asked me the question, what can we do? What could we do to just remind people that we're all in this together? And off the back of that, I went away and began to think about it. And off the back of that conversation, we came up with gratitude mapping. And what gratitude mapping does is it asks people to think about their normal tasks, then to think about what they need in order to complete those tasks. And then the next step is, where do those things that they need to complete those tasks come from? So you identify essentially their internal suppliers. And then it just goes, well, once you've identified that, if that person then is required to do this in order for you to do this, then every time you do that job, there's a reason to be grateful for them doing their job. So we deliberately don't ask people, who are you grateful for today? Because then they'll just list their friends. We try and make it more systematic and base it on internal suppliers. And then we get all this information, we ask people to fill in a questionnaire, we get all this information, and then we create a network map of the business, which first time everyone looks at these maps, they just go, that's just all over the place. And then they stop and think about that and think, wow, everybody's connected to everybody. And that then opens the way to have conversations about valuing each other, about how if you do your job well, it makes so many other people's days better. And then a conversation around behaviors that can come out that can exist within the business. So one lovely one, which was so simple, but probably just took this moment of reflection. We had one lady whose role, she was the only one in her role in the business, and her role periodically required her to walk through reception and get some information from the reception. It's a very busy reception area, so receptionists were often very busy, and she didn't get on well with the receptionist because she would go barging in and demand their attention and demand what she needed and then disappear again. And having realized that that's what she was doing, she said, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk, when I walk through the door into reception, I'm just going to pause for 2 seconds and notice what's going on. And then perhaps I'm going to go and find one of the reception people in reception who is least busy, rather than the one who's closest. and this whole team were coming up with just little tweaks to their behaviors and attitudes. And so that's gratitude mapping. It's about reconnecting people and getting to people to appreciate the system that the human system that creates a business, and then about forming habits that reinforce the relationships in that system.
Yeah, I love how, like you said, it connects everybody, but it sounds like by taking that bird's eye view over everything, you obliterate hierarchy and everyone's on a level playing field. You can see the importance of your role and the chain that goes through. That's, yeah, such a lovely way to think about it, because it can be very easy to get wrapped up in the day-to-day of things and think, oh, well, what I'm doing doesn't make a difference, but just ignore it. That sort of chain of command just disappears, and all of a sudden you're all part of a big ecosystem, and it's a really lovely way to think about it. And also sort of starting at the beginning and then looking at the end, and then working your way backwards and going, okay, so that works. Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, okay, brilliant. No, that's super interesting. What I'm going to do now then is the 3 questions I am asking everybody at the end of their interview.
Yes.
So first of all, what is one piece of advice that you wish you would have had at the start of your career?
I wish somebody had told me this might not be for life. Because I went in with a hugely strong sense of vocation, a belief that even though I was very young, had found my life's calling. And I think that was the beginning of the entanglement that caused me so many problems when I decided to change career. So I wish somebody had just taken the time to say, this is important work, Ian, but it might not be for life. There might be other things for you to do.
I love that. It's so important to, I love that. Okay. And what's one book, talk, or podcast you would recommend to someone?
So it's a book that I've never met anybody else who's read it. It's called Wave Rider by Harrison Owen. And it's Harrison Owen invented open space technology, which is a way of conducting conferences that allow people to follow interest. And he has and then Wave Rider is an application of that thinking into leadership. And he has a lovely phrase in the book that says, authentic leadership occurs at the confluence of passion and responsibility. And he talks about how leadership should flow around a business, that it's not about position, it's about activity and passion and responsibility. And it's just an excellent view of leadership, probably ahead of its time as well.
I'll put that on my reading list. Okay, and who is one person that has really inspired you throughout your career?
So I was thinking about this, and I think it's probably, he'd be totally embarrassed if I said this, it would be Miles, who I wrote the book with. So Miles, back in the 1990s, was part of the organization that formulated the GROW model, which is at the heart of coaching. He also wrote a book called Effective Coaching, which is now in its 3rd edition and has sold 300,000 copies worldwide. And I found myself working with him 7 or 8 years ago. And I've learned a huge amount from him, not just about coaching, but stuff that's changed the way I approach life. And even now, you know, he's got to a stage in his career where he's doing keynote speeches and really interesting work. And so there's an aspirational thing there as well to sort of find my own way to where he's got to.
Love it. Okay, brilliant. All right. And if our audience would like to find out more about Growhouse and your work, where can they find you?
So we're online at growhouse-gb.com. They can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to have interesting conversations with people. in and around Birmingham all the time. So always happy for somebody to say, can we have a coffee and have a chat? Yeah, so that's how to find me.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciated everything you shared today. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.